Question Friday.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast where we read and discuss questions submitted by you all about life, the universe, or anything else that might come up. My name is Ben Mirsky, and this is Frog Question Friday. Today's topic for Frog Questions is going to be about religion, and religion is obviously going to be an important recurring topic for this podcast. We aren't specifically focused on religion, but I am a Catholic. I think people know that I'm a Catholic, so there may be questions about that. And just in general, when we're doing a podcast that's centered around the search for truth, it is inevitable that we're going to end up circling religion quite a few times over the course of the next 100 episodes. So let's talk about religion. The question I received on the website, I actually got two questions that were about religion. The first one was pretty simple. Is religion outdated? And then somebody else asked, will people someday look at modern religions the way we look at ancient mythology? Now, it's possible it was the same person who asked both of these questions. They're both kind of in the same vein. I like the second one, the analogy here being that we look at ancient Greek and Roman or Egyptian religious systems, and we think how ridiculous that they thought there were multiple gods who maybe lived on Mount Olympus or really frequently visited the earth and had intimate dealings with people, and it seems really ridiculous to us, and we think that we're so much more evolved. But really, our religious system is essentially going to be looked at the same way by people in the future. How could they have believed in Jesus or any of the modern religions we have today? So this is a good question. It's a relevant question, and there's also seems to be this concept, and this person didn't really proclaim themselves to be an atheist per se, but I think that atheism is going to figure prominently into this discussion. And a lot of atheists will take this tactic as saying that science is better than religion, that really we should be focused on facts, that facts are better than faith. And I just want to make this claim. This is a pretty bold claim, but I'm going to make this claim here at the top of this podcast, that religion is actually based far more on fact than people give it credit for. And in fact, science is based more on faith than people give it credit for. I know that's a bold claim, and I know when you're talking about science and when you're talking about proving things with fact, you need to prove any claim that you make, so I'm going to prove it. And I want to start by saying this. Religion is actually the first and greatest science experiment that humanity has ever conducted. When you talk about science experiments, we have this thing we call the scientific method. And I've seen the scientific method printed several different ways. I'm not sure that there is one standard set of tasks that you carry out, but it generally goes like this. You ask a question, you develop a hypothesis as a possible answer to that question, then you collect data, you run experiments, and then you end up drawing conclusions based on the data you collected in the experiments you ran. And then potentially you may repeat those experiments over and over until you really narrow down what the answer is to your initial question. Now, I may have just butchered parts of that, but you get the point. The scientific method is a very fact-based approach to answering really important questions. And it's a method that, for some reason, the scientific community has a monopoly on, and it seems like the religious community doesn't use this method at all. Instead, religion seems to be based entirely in faith. But I think there's a problem with looking at it that way, because religion really is one of the first experiments we ever ran. So if you rewind the clock, go back in time to ancient peoples in, let's say, ancient Egypt, what we see in ancient religious systems is actually a pretty complex science experiment. The ancient Egyptians would observe the universe, and they had no real knowledge of what things like weather were. They made observations, and they tried to form conclusions based on those observations. So we start with the scientific method. We ask a question. Is there a higher power to the universe? Does God exist? Something like that. And we develop a hypothesis, and now we need to collect data and run experiments. Well, what data is available? We look at things like the weather. What possible explanation could you have for a tornado or an earthquake or a flood other than there must be some higher power out there that's punishing you? It seems primitive to us, but that's only because we have this more evolved understanding of what the weather is and how the world works. At the time, this is actually a very logical conclusion. So you have a group of the very smartest people in your community come together. They have this idea that God is either looking kindly on you or punishing you for something. And so if a tornado is threatening to destroy your village, or if you have a drought, you have everyone in the village make sacrifices to this god or pray to this god. And then you have somebody coming along, and we're in ancient Egypt, so we'll choose an ancient sounding name. We'll call him Kevin. So Kevin is going to come along, and Kevin is going to say, you know what? I actually don't think the changes in the weather are due to some divine power. I think there may be some explanation. And once again, the community is going to say, all right, Kevin, well, prove it. So Kevin has a hypothesis that God does not exist, and he's going to collect data. Well, what data do you collect? How about this for data? Every time a tornado is coming towards our village, it doesn't seem to make a difference whether we pray or make sacrifices. Sometimes the tornado just destroys our villages. Sometimes we can pray and make sacrifices, and the drought still wipes out all of our crops. There doesn't seem to be a direct correlation between how much we pray and make sacrifices and what the weather does. Now, this is data that Kevin can use to draw the conclusion that maybe there is no God, or at the very least, maybe weather functions independently from any sort of higher power. Now, we've been talking a lot about data, and I just want to make draw a distinction here. In the world of science, we have two types of data, qualitative and quantitative. So quantitative data is data that you can, quantify. It's built around numbers. It's something you can measure, temperature, distance, speed. This is all quantitative data. It's all revolved around numbers, and it's easy to use those numbers to draw factual conclusions. It's usually empirically provable also. Whereas qualitative data is not so easy to, quantify. Qualitative data still exists, and it's still true, but there aren't really numbers associated with it. So here's an example of qualitative data in action. A person A says, gay marriage is evil. Person B says, I think it is evil to prohibit people from getting married if they want to get married. Now, on the surface level, it seems like person A and person B completely disagree with each other. There isn't much they have in common, and you can imagine that if this conversation continued, it may not go well. However, despite the fact that it seems like these people are going to disagree about just about everything, we do have something in here that they both agree on. They both use the word evil. They both presume that there's a concept called evil, and they both presume that this concept does exist in the world. If I say that gay marriage is evil, I'm equating some human institution with this concept that isn't invented by humans that still exists in the world. If I say that it's evil to prohibit people from getting married, I am once again referencing this same concept that exists in the world. Both these people believe that evil exists, and I bet just about everyone in the world believes that evil exists. Now, we may have disagreements about what is evil, but we all agree that there is this thing called evil. Now, the fact that evil exists in the world is not proof for God. I don't think I even need to say that. It's obvious. It's not proof that God exists, but evil is data that helps us draw conclusions about other things, because evil does exist. Beauty does exist. Love does exist. Now, people may argue about what constitutes evil and what constitutes beauty and what constitutes love, but that doesn't mean that these things are in question. It just means that how we define them may change from person to person. But these concepts are real concepts. They must exist. And we can use these things as basically numbers in a complicated equation that we can use to prove other things. This is actually leading us to something we would call philosophy or even theology. See, once we acknowledge that these things must exist, whether or not God exists actually becomes sort of irrelevant, because I can make calculations based on the data I have. So I'm going to believe that God exists or believe that God does not exist based on faith, because there aren't really any numbers or data to prove or disprove that. But I believe everything else around that core belief based on fact. By the way, as an aside here, don't let atheists tell you that what they believe is more factual than what Christians or Muslims or Jews believe. An atheist believes that God does not exist, but there is no more proof that God does not exist than there is proof that God does exist. These are all simply jumping off points. Every religion in the world has to start with a faith-based assertion, because there's no way to prove this core question, does God exist or not? All we can do is prove data that surrounds that central idea and decide ultimately the decision of whether or not God exists is going to be the sum of different experiments that we run, and we'll see where the evidence leads us. But what we'll notice with this example is that whether or not I believe in God, I can actually arrive at the same conclusion using evil as a data point. If evil exists, then happiness in the world must not be the greatest good that I can achieve. See, I can arrive at this conclusion two different ways. If I presume that God exists, and I presume that God exists and still allows evil for some reason that I can't explain, it means that God must desire something for me and for us other than happiness. There must be something greater or better than happiness out there. If the greatest good in the universe was happiness, then God would simply eliminate evil and we would all be happy all the time. So the fact that God allows us to be sad sometimes, the fact that God allows evil to thrive, means that there must be something bigger out there. God is playing a longer game. Okay, but let's assume I don't believe in God. If I'm an atheist and I say God does not exist, well, I still have to explain evil. And the way an atheist might explain evil, once again, is, like it or not, bad things are going to happen. Not because of God, but simply because evil exists in the world. And the fact that bad things happen means it's up to you to decide whether to spend your life searching for happiness, which may or may not be achievable, or simply to spend your time doing something that is worthwhile, something that will benefit others. See, whether I believe in God or not, I arrive at the same conclusion, that there are bigger things in the world than happiness. And we arrive at that conclusion not because of any faith-based assertion, but because of a series of logical progressions that start with the simple fact that evil exists in the world. So what we're doing now is philosophy or theology, but we are making calculations and we are proving concepts using the data that's available to us. Just because it doesn't involve numbers doesn't mean we're not doing science. So your belief or disbelief in God does not actually affect the outcome of this simple experiment. As the experiments get more complicated, obviously whether or not you believe in God is going to frame how you approach these questions. But the point is, we are making a series of logical assertions, and these logical assertions are going to drive developments in religion. And if we look at the development in religion over time, we'll see that Kevin, our ancient Egyptian friend, was actually right. Religion does evolve, and it evolves because of more data. Remember, the last step of the scientific method is repeat. We go back, we use the new information we've collected, and we run new experiments. And we're running these experiments all the time. And this doesn't necessarily mean we're searching for God. It just means we are fine-tuning the way that we perceive the universe. Okay, now, obviously, I'm getting a little bit wound up, so we're just going to take a quick break and do Word of the Week.
Frog Questions will return after these messages.
Hey, everybody, our Word of the Week this week is actually two words: confirmation bias. A confirmation bias is going to be incredibly important anytime you are doing research, and will probably come up several times in the course of this podcast. Confirmation bias is the idea that when I am doing research, I am more likely to notice information that agrees with the point of view I already have. And this is why people who tend to lean conservative only watch Fox News, and people who tend to lean liberal only watch CNN. It's because we like to watch media that agrees with the point we already have. As another example, if I am a Christian, I might go to the Bible to prove my point. And I look at the Bible and I see that it is filled with all sorts of little scripture quotes that support my belief that God exists and that my religion is correct. Whereas an atheist may look at the Bible and simply see a series of contradictions. Now, this doesn't mean that the Christian or the atheist is 100% right. It means that both of them are looking at the same source through tinted glasses that let them only see what they would like to see. Now, avoiding confirmation bias is all but impossible, but it really is our responsibility to do the best that we can not to have a bias when we're looking at sources. When you do research, make sure you do good research and that you try to set aside your own beliefs and simply learn something new. Confirmation bias is our word of the week. Let's get back to the episode. Okay, so we said that religion makes logical assertions, but that we start with a faith-based premise. So Christianity will start with the faith-based premise that God exists, where atheism will start with a faith-based premise that God does not exist. And faith-based arguments, we assume, are limited to religion and that we don't have them in the world of true scientific inquiry. But that's actually not true. See, science makes faith-based arguments too. We have a lot of great theories in the world. We have this theory that the universe was created by the Big Bang. We can use our observation of light and how it bends to predict where other galaxies and solar systems and planets are. Our idea of where other planets are is actually based on our understanding of how planets revolve around stars, how planets revolve around their suns. This is actually a fun fact. If you've ever heard those news reports that we have discovered a planet that is capable of sustaining human life, and then you go to the article and it has a little picture of the planet, those pictures you see are always artist renderings because we don't actually have good photographic evidence of these planets. What we do is observe stars. We look at these lights in the distance, and occasionally these lights will have little shadows move in front of them. And these shadows move in front of them with a predictable frequency, which means that they must be planets. And then we can use that frequency to calculate somehow how far planets are from their sun and how far they are from us. And this is all really complicated, and it's way beyond my understanding of, math and things. But the crazy thing about all of this is that all of these predictions, the Big Bang, the movement of light and planets, is all based on our understanding of gravity. And gravity is actually just a theory that hasn't really been proven yet either. And I know that sounds ridiculous to question gravity, and I'm not really questioning gravity, but there is something important to understand here. We have observed that things that have mass are attracted to other things that have mass. So if I hold something in the air and let it go, and it has mass, it moves towards the most massive object that it is close to, which happens to be the Earth, i.e., it falls to the ground. And this is something we observe all of the time, and we know for sure it happens in our solar system. But what we don't know for sure is whether all things in the universe move towards other things at the same rate, and we don't know even that they all move towards each other at all in other parts of the universe. And obviously the universe couldn't exist the way that it is if there wasn't some sort of consistency to gravity, but there's still plenty in the universe that we can't explain using our current perception of what gravity is. If you'd like to Google more about this, you can look up extra fast stars, or stars that move quicker than we would expect based on our understanding of gravity. There are these things called extramassive hydrogen clouds, which, again, I'm not smart enough to understand what this is, but I know that this is something that, based on our understanding of how gravity works, shouldn't exist the way that it does. We also have this thing called the flyby anomaly, where I think this is something to do with satellites when we're putting them into orbit or taking them down out of orbit, that they move more quickly at times than we would expect them to. Now, this doesn't mean that gravity is wrong. It just means there's more to it than we know. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't make calculations based on gravity. It simply means that as we're making these calculations, we need to keep in mind that we may not fully understand how gravity works. In an interesting way, the language surrounding this scientific exploration of the universe becomes something like, if gravity exists the way we think it does, then this is the predicted outcome. And strangely enough, that's very similar to what we hear in the world of religion, the world of theology. If God exists, then this is our predicted outcome. See, we may not have all the facts about the physical universe or the spiritual universe, but we can use our observations and the data we collect, either quantitative or qualitative, to make predictions about what other parts of the physical or spiritual universe might look like. And this is why religion today looks vastly different from how it did 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 years ago. We have these really important concepts in religion. They're sort of moral codes. The Jewish people had the Ten Commandments, which eventually was adopted by Christianity. There are the 5 pillars of Islam. There are these really important core beliefs that religions have. And we know that these things are good. We know that the 10 Commandments are good, and we know that the 5 pillars of Islam are good. But there's a deeper question, which is, why are they good? Maybe we happen to luck into writing down 10 things or 5 things that are good about the universe, but why are these things good? See, religions have moved towards a deeper understanding of why the 10 Commandments and the 5 pillars of Islam are good, and it's the Kevins of the world who move us forward. You remember Kevin, our Egyptian friend? Kevins move us forward, and actually, in a way, Jesus was a Kevin. Remember that Jesus, in several places in the Gospel of Matthew, talks about how we really shouldn't follow any of the 10 Commandments simply because they're there or because they seem like they would be good ideas. We should follow them because the core truth of what we're doing is correct. It's not wrong to kill someone. It's wrong to hate someone. It's not wrong to cheat on your spouse. It is wrong to lose the love for your spouse that leads you into infidelity. See, it's the core of the rule. It's not the rule itself. And this brings me to something I think we're basically going to end on here, but there's this growing concept, and this is not a concept you hear a lot among atheists. It's actually more of a concept you hear around people who like to believe in a higher power, but don't really like to call themselves a certain religion or put a label on things. So you hear people say this phrase a lot: I am spiritual, but I'm not religious. Spiritual, but not religious. This phrase is really dumb, but before I can explain why it's dumb, we need to break this down. It sounds really attractive to say that you're spiritual but not religious, but this is actually a really dangerous way to approach the spiritual world. Basically, what you're saying, if you say that you are spiritual but not religious, is that you believe in a higher power in the universe, but you dislike trying to nail down exactly what that means. So maybe you believe in God, maybe you just believe in a higher power and you don't want to give that higher power a name. And all of these beliefs are fine, by the way. But when you say you don't like trying to nail down exactly what something means, what that actually boils down to is that you dislike community. And that is the biggest difference between people who say they are spiritual and people who say they are religious. People who say they are religious live in communities, and communities talk and write things down. Communities make rules, and they declare things absolute. And yes, sometimes communities get things wrong. Sometimes communities make really big mistakes. But the great thing about a community is that there is a group of people who are talking to each other and trying to better each other. When you retreat into this spirituality, you are removing your voice from that conversation. When you say I'm spiritual but not religious, you're saying I don't really want to talk about what my beliefs are. I don't really want to try to nail down with any specificity what I believe. So you're taking yourself out of the ongoing conversation of religion. And yes, I will admit, as a religious person, I will admit religions are not perfect and they've made plenty of mistakes and they do lots of things wrong. But that's kind of the point. I think Pope Francis even said the church is a mess, but that's okay. It's always better to be involved in the conversation because religions aren't going away. Science isn't going away. As long as there is qualitative and quantitative data that can be analyzed, there will be these institutions that want to analyze it. And as long as the scientific communities use quantitative data to learn about the physical universe, the religious communities are going to be using qualitative data to learn about the spiritual universe. There's a lot of improving we need to do, but we don't improve these things and we don't fix the things that are broken unless we are all in conversation with each other. And if you retreat from religion, you are retreating from that conversation, which is essentially just saying, yeah, everything's fine the way it is. I have nothing here to contribute. There's plenty of improving we need to do, which means we need all the Kevins we can get. We need people who are going to say, you know what, I'm not sure that conclusion is correct. Let's rerun that experiment. Let's look at new data. Let's see if we can form a new hypothesis. So to answer the initial question, will people someday look back at religion as the way that they do at Greek or Roman mythology? I don't know. I think that religion in the future will look different from how it does now, but I think we're actually on a good track. I think people are moving in the right direction. As far as the question, is religion outdated? Of course it's not. That would be similar to asking, is science outdated? It's kind of a ridiculous question, although people will continue to ask it, and I think thousands of years from now, people will be asking the same question. Is religion outdated? Well, no, of course not. There's always more to learn, and we can always fine-tune things, but I think we're in a good place. I think we're headed in a good direction. So that concludes our episode for today. While I've been recording, people have been sending in, you all have been sending in questions live. If you would like to send in live questions for our next episode, you can follow Frog Questions on Snapchat, Instagram, whatever social media you use. All right, so this means we are starting our lightning round. So I'm going to see how many questions I can answer in the next 7 minutes so that we can get out of here on time. All right, so these questions were submitted anonymously through the Frog Questions website. Let's see what we got. Question number 1, how do we know that God is a he? Okay, well, we don't. In fact, it's more than we don't know. It's that we specifically know that God is not a he. It doesn't mean that God is a she either. It means that God is a spiritual being that does not have the physical components necessary to be classified as a he or a she. The pronouns he and she refer to, really they were supposed to refer to sex or gender. Either way, they are gendered designators in the English language that refer to your sex or gender. God, as a spiritual being, does not have a sex, obviously, because God is not physical. God does not have reproductive organs. There's no part of God's body that you could point to and say, look, it's a he or it's a she. God is just God. Now, if you want to talk about gender as the parts of your personality that make you seem more masculine or feminine, besides the fact that you have one genitalia or the other, you'll actually find something really interesting about God, which is that God actually encompasses both genders. If we look at the way that God acts, we see both very strong masculinity present, both in Scripture and just in people's personal experiences. We also see very feminine characteristics in God. So we'll see both the masculine and the feminine in God. It's probably incorrect to say that God is genderless. I think the better adjective would be that God is genderful, but God certainly does not have the physical components necessary to be a he or she. We started calling God a he or a she thousands of years ago when we lived in a patriarchal society, and it made sense to think of our relationship with God as a father-child relationship, but that part of religion definitely is outdated. Okay, question number 2, why is the Catholic Church so rigid and strict? Well, this is actually part of what I love about the Catholic Church, and it's not that the Church is strict. I actually don't think that it is. I love that the Catholic Church makes claims. They make strong statements about things that they believe in, and they stand up for those beliefs. I don't think I could be a part of a religion that isn't interested in trying to nail down specifically what they believe. I like that there's this ongoing conversation that tries to draw a line in the sand and figure out exactly what we believe about things. Question number 3. Since you're Catholic, here it comes. Is there anything that you don't like about the Catholic Church? Yeah, well, I mean, this is similar to the last question, and I was actually kind of expecting something like this. Yes, so I'm Catholic. Everyone knows that, I think. Is there anything you don't like about the Catholic Church? There's plenty about the Church that I think it could change for the better. The Catholic Church has been changing constantly for 2,000 years. It continues to evolve and get better. Is there anything I don't like about the Catholic Church? There are plenty of conversations I really want to be involved in, and yes, there are teachings that I think need to be developed to more of a modern, to fit the modern context. But sometimes that might mean that there's something wrong with what the Church believes, and sometimes that might mean that there's something wrong with me. So there is a lot about the Catholic Church that challenges me, and that just makes me want to research it even more, and in some cases makes me want to get involved in debate with people in the Church even more. So there are things about the Catholic Church that I may disagree with, but those are the things actually that make me love being a Catholic, because it's this ongoing argument and discussion. Question number 4, doesn't the Big Bang disprove God's existence? No, it doesn't. As I said before, the Big Bang is a theory that still has quite a few holes in it, so we're not done nailing down exactly how it happened. This is not me trying to say, the Big Bang didn't happen, the world was created in 7 days. I think the Big Bang is a decent theory for how the universe was created, but there's still a lot we need to learn. And as we learn more about how the universe was created, what we are learning is how God decided to create the universe. There is no information that we are going to collect that is going to disprove God's existence. It is not possible to disprove God's existence. But as we collect more quantitative data and form a clearer and clearer understanding of where the universe came from, we are forming a clearer and clearer understanding of the way in which God chose to create the universe. I personally am not super interested in the origins of the universe. I tend to be more interested in the here and now, so I don't really care where we came from. I care how we treat each other in the modern age. So this isn't super interesting to me, but if you are involved in the Big Bang versus 7-day creation argument, I can see why this would be important. No, the Big Bang does not disprove God's existence. Question number 5. The Bible has all of the facts you need. Science can't contribute anything useful. That's, first of all, not a question. It's a statement, which, fine. I think there's something really dangerous in what you're saying here, which is that, first of all, that the Bible has all of the facts you need. The Bible is a collection of stories, some of which are historical and factual, some of which are intended to be figurative, they're allegorical stories, some of it's just straight up poetry. So the Bible has a myriad of different genres that you need to take into account when you're reading it. This doesn't mean that the Bible is untrue. Obviously, the Bible contains spiritual truth, but especially in, for example, the creation narrative, people will, fight to the death saying that the world was created in exactly 7 days, because that's from Genesis chapter 1. But the fact of the matter is, in Genesis chapter 2, we have a second creation story that has a different timeline. It says the world was created in 2 days rather than 1. So what we're left with is this kind of contradiction between the factual information, which doesn't mean that the Bible contradicts itself. It means that the editors of the Bible decided to put together multiple different figurative or allegorical accounts of how the world was created, and they did this because they didn't want us to believe in any one factual or historical account of creation. They wanted to show the spiritual truth of where the universe came from. So when you say that the Bible has all the facts you need, you are first of all presuming that everything you're reading in the Bible is factual, which is not true. It's actually kind of dangerous. And the second part of your statement is that science can't contribute anything useful, which is also a dangerous approach, because as I started this podcast by saying, religion is a giant science experiment. Everything we do in religion is fact-based inquiry, and we do use the scientific method. It just looks a little bit different from the way that, scientific inquiry into the physical universe looks. But science is a great thing, and scientific exploration of the universe is a great thing. It teaches us a lot about what God chose to do in the universe. So, as I'm assuming you're a Christian, obviously, but as a Christian, I think you need to be careful not to fear science. I think that science is a really important thing. Okay, so that's all the questions I have for today. If you'd like to see photos from this or other shows, or contribute live questions when we do go live, you can follow Frog Questions on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or Snapchat. If you have a comment about today's show or would like to submit a question of your own, you can visit frogquestions.com. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Frog Questions wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. For more information or to ask a question of your own, please visit frogquestions.com.